Testing, testing. Hello, friends. I would like to talk to you a little bit more about color and light before we get into putting it into use. We will do that by looking at this relatively flat image to start with in Photoshop. We'll look a little bit more at what I mean by opening image adjustments levels and looking at the histogram. Um, Here I want to highlight, well, we're looking at our exposure. If you've done cinematography, you will have seen a histogram like this on your camera every time that you open it and use it to adjust your exposure. Anytime that you see something like this happen where it gets cut off, it means that you've lost information and detail. In this case, since it's on the left, we're talking about the blacks getting lost and this here being the black point or 0. Up here, if this were cut off, we would talk about the whites getting lost, um, the pure white, or the value of 1. We talked about 0 representing black and 1 representing white. And usually when you capture an image, you try to have everything within these limits so that then you have room to correct it and so that you don't lose any information. Anytime that something is pure white and beyond, there is no detail in it. It's just flat and it cannot be color corrected and it is not visually interesting. So typically it's avoided. Same goes for pure black. Up here though, in a situation like this where an image is more flat, you might want to tighten that up and actually get it closer to pure black or pure white. And that would be by manipulating the black point and the white point by remapping them. A tool like this would allow you to do that. There are many tools. What this diagram tells us is that here, the brightest pixel, or the brightest spot of the image, probably this area here or something else, some other highlight, usually it's a highlight. Usually highlights are white, but what this tells us is that the highlight is actually this gray right here. This, to the naked eye, might look like it's white, but actually it's not. And the way that you would, FYI, the way that you would start to correct that is to just dial this down. This says, you know what, the white point used to be, the highlight used to be this, but you know what, I'm going to make the highlight to be the white point. I'm going to remap that gray so that anything that is this gray is actually going to be white. Same goes on this side. If I were to pull this up, and usually if you see, me personally, sometimes I cut the blacks off a little bit. I would be inclined to do that. But what this tells us is that, well, anything that used to be this gray is now going to be the black point. And if I exaggerate this, anything that used to be of this value is now going to be pure black. So that is exposure, a little bit about exposure, black point and white point. I talked about the values of 0 and 1. Here you see 0 to 255. In Adobe, you will see 0 to 255. In Nuke, you will see 0 to 1. For our purposes in compositing, we will talk about the values of 0 to 1. So now, a little bit about HSV, hue, saturation, and value. Hue is the color itself. What color is it? Red, blue, green, yellow. Saturation is the purity of the color, how pure it is. If I move this to the right, you can see this here, S, increasing. If I move it to the left, you can see it decreasing. Over here on the right, it is more pure. Over here, it is less pure. The less saturated it is, the closer to gray it is until it is just desaturated at 0. It's interesting, with saturation, you would be able to tell, once you train your eye from looking at pixels for a while, if I were to show you this, you might be able to look at it at a glance and tell, you know what, that has a little bit of green in it. So look forward to your eye becoming more sensitive in that way. And finally, the value, that's hue saturation. Finally, the value is used interchangeably with brightness. Here you see HSV. Most of the time, hopefully you see HSV, or you would hear this referred to as HSV. You will also hear brightness and value talked about as luminance. Sometimes we use those three words interchangeably. I'm going to pull up another tool here, similar to levels, but a little bit more convenient and flexible. This is the curves. It has the exact same map as the histogram, and I can do the same things with it. Boom, boom, boom. All right. So now, here I'm manipulating the black point and the white point again. I want to talk about contrast. Contrast, well, you probably have an idea of what it looks like. It looks something like that. When you turn up an effect named contrast, it usually does something of this nature, but you may not have been able to describe precisely why. Uh, what contrast does is it takes 0 and 1 and brings them closer together evenly by an equal amount. Okay, so, and you can see that it's not touching any of the values that are in the middle. So that's what it does. It's a little bit harsh if you do it too much. Which brings me to talking about the midtones. The midtones, there's a name for that, which is gamma. And to turn the gamma up or down, you will find an effect called contrast. You'll find an effect called gamma in any package. But it manipulates the midtones without touching 0 and 1. This helps you to have a contrasty effect without crushing the blacks or the whites, or without blowing out your image. And sometimes, depending on the image and depending on the look that you're going for, you might need a delicate balance of these two if you're going for a certain aesthetic effect, while having your image be a little bit more elegant. I'm going to just exaggerate the gamma down so that you can see. When I pull this down, maybe stare at the cloud right here, which is one of the brightest points of this image. No matter how much I pull the gamma down, this part of the image is not actually changing. Oops. It's part of why I don't use curves myself, or avoid it anyway, but it's very handy. You'll also notice that, let me see, if you watch the darker parts of the image, no matter how much I pull this down, that part pretty much stays the same. Okay. And if you actually manipulate a gamma effect, it will not move the values around like this. It will just bring it straight down. All right. So once again, contrast only affects 0 and 1 by bringing them closer together. Gamma only affects the midtones. Actually, sometimes if your image is a bit murky, it can help to turn the gamma up a little bit. But when you do that, typically what happens next is you need to turn contrast up a little bit. But it's nicer when you have something like a curves tool because it's visual. And you can also manipulate the black point and white point separately instead of equally. Right. So now I'd like to bring up this interesting image, and I'll tell you why it's interesting. Well, here you can see that it's named mixed lighting. That's because it's mixed with indoor and outdoor lighting. You should be well familiar with this if you've done cinematography already. But I'd like to ask you a rhetorical question in this virtual format. What color is this right here? Or better, what color is daylight? You might be thinking daylight is white, or you might even be thinking that daylight is yellow because of the sun, but actually, you know what? Daylight is blue, and I'm going to prove that to you in a second. I'm going to grab the color picker, and I'm going to sample this. Boom. And here you see this bluish color right here. It's kind of weird, isn't it? It definitely looks white, doesn't it? Nope, it's blue. The light is passing through the sky, which is blue, which will tint the light to be the color of the sky. I'll just prove that to you one more time by going over here to this Kelvin chart, which you've which you should be pretty familiar with if you've done cinematography as well. Over here in this diagram, we can see that daylight is defined as this set of hues over here, this hue range. And here you also see a representation of household bulbs or various indoor lights. And if I go back over here, I can see that I have those hues with this household light bulb. Good. And that is something that would come into play with white balance. And I'd just like to highlight color temperature. But that is more for cinematography. White balance, your image, your software / your camera needs to know what it is that you would like to define as white. Depending on the lighting, it tints everything. The lighting tints everything so that, let's say, if this wall were actually white, well, right now to us it looks more like orange, or this over here, this DVD cover should be white, but if I were to sample it, it's actually this warmer sort of orangey brown. There are corrections that can be made to bring this back to being white. A lot of times that's done in camera, sometimes not so much, and there are things we can do about that in post. I would also like to highlight that, and we will see a demonstration of this, that complementary colors are actually different in light than they are in pigment. In light, we will use the complementary colors blue and yellow. Red and green are still complementary, just like pigments, red and green. But in this case, let's see, I think if I go to adjustments, color balance, and you know what, this is actually a good chance to think about white balance too. Here in these settings for balancing the color, you can see that this is already optimized sort of for blue and yellow as complements. So actually, you know what? This is interesting. Let's say we saw that this white over here was actually a little bit too orangey, kind of yellowish. So I'm going to remove yellow from this and put blue into this. And you can see the subtle change that maybe some of these areas over here in the wall are becoming more closer to white. If you look at this part of the screen over here, if I were to think about this in terms of complementary colors, if I mix blue into yellow, it will neutralize it. So right now it's kind of warmer, and if I pull it over to more blue, it gets neutralized, it gets rid of it. If you just stare right here, you'll see yellowish. I move this over to the right, and if your eye is sensitive enough, you'll see it getting closer to white. We'll look at that in Nuke and get a better feel for it. I'll jump over there right now. Alright. So here I have these two images. You know what? I'm going to get rid of this. Okay. What I want to do is take this image. These are just from two totally different sources. I want to take this and make it look like it belongs in this environment. Alright. And I'd like to view these in a split screen. So what I'll do is, alright, so for this one I'm going to hit 1 to connect it to the viewer. Then I'll select this and hit 2. So now I have 1 and 2 connected. 1, 2, 1, 2. Then I'll go up here and change this to wipe, so that now I can wipe across to see either or. I'll just keep it here in the middle-ish. Yeah, I'll keep it over here. Cool. And once again, I want to color correct this one on the left to look like it belongs in the environment of this one on the right. It could still be outdoors. I know that this one is outdoors, so let's say that we want to make this look like it's actually the patio of this one. So in order to do color correction, I will do the grade node. Of course, you can find this over here in the color tab, but if you know the name, just hit tab, type the name. Here it is, grade 1. All right. So remember our friends, hue, saturation, and value. I'm going to go in that order to color correct this to look more like it belongs to this. So starting with hue, actually, you know what? You can also approach this from just solving simple problems. Like if you look at it, what is wrong with this? What is it that makes it look like it does not belong? And you know what? I promise you it will map to HSV in that order. Well, first of all, this image is too warm. If I go over here to multiply, if you remember, we multiplied our image that we took apart to look at the pixels and the components, the red, green, and blue channel. We used multiply. Actually, we have the multiply function inside of the grade node. This image is too warm. If I open this by clicking the number 4, I can actually access the RGB channels just like in the multiply node. This image is too warm. My access to warmth here is red. Green and blue are cool colors. So it's intuitive. What you would do here is decrease red. Whoops, this is the offset. I'm going to go up here to multiply. Right now, it's set, everything is set to 1. So I'm going to increment here. I'm going to type in 0.9 and see how it looks. Better already. I'm going to try 0.8. Whoops. 0.8, see how it looks, and it's getting kind of greenish. And you know what? That makes sense because of the complementary colors. The more I remove red, the more green will be visible because they're opposite on the color wheel. I go to 7, I think it's just going too far. So you know what? I'm going to go 3, and it looks like I'm manipulating tiny, tiny numbers, but your eye will be eventually sensitive enough to be able to see the difference. You know what? I'm going to leave it there for now. And now, you know what? When I look at this, I think I've removed enough warmth. I'm going to click the grade node and hit the D key to disable it so I can get it before after. So this is before, this is after. It looks like I was manipulating tiny, tiny decimal points, but actually here, when I go to check before after, it makes a big difference. So it's a good thing to check your before after often. Before, after. Alright, cool. So now I'm going to look at this image again, just stare at it. Try to identify the next problem. The first problem was, you know what, this is too warm. Boom, removed red. Next problem. This is too yellow. It's just yellow now. Remember, complementary colors. How do you get rid of a color? You want to, just like paint, you want to mix in the complements. Blue and yellow are complements. So I'm going to increase blue. I'll probably say 1.2. Looks better already. I'll try 1.3. And sometimes you need to go farther than necessary. Maybe I'll try like 1.5 and see how I feel about it. It definitely looks too blue now, so then I'll go back down probably to 1.4, increment down, 1.35. I'll just leave it there for now. I'll go to click the grade node before, after. Much better. It's getting closer. You know, one thing that happens too is actually you want to. It's also wise to color correct the green channel last. It's one that we would be most sensitive to. But one thing about when you get into these sort of decimal ranges and it's almost too difficult to tell the difference, it might be time to look to another tool. So this is probably and these were not shot at the same time, nor were they shot in the same location. But you know, there's other things we can look at. Like to help us out. We know that we have daylights coming in from out here. Uh, Strong daylight. We know that daylight is blue, so that gives us a hint that we need a little bit of extra blue, maybe. Um, Another thing is you have to use the science a little bit when your eye can't really do the trick, and your eye often starts playing tricks on you. I think we're stuck here, so what I would do next is go to saturation. We did hue, and now we're going to do saturation. Things are a bit intense here, aren't they? It doesn't seem like we can manipulate hue too much more, but these are intense, the purity and the intensity of the color. So I'm going to just grab a saturation node, and I'm just going to turn that down. Start turning it down, see what happens. Boom. Cool. Pretty much there. So I'm just going to hit the saturation, do a before, after. I'm going to zoom in so you can see before, after, before, after. Boom. And maybe 0.88 is not perfect, but it'll do for now. Yeah. Boom. We should note that there is also saturation in the color correct mode. Color correct mode is a bit overkill sometimes, but there is a master saturation here. FYI. I'm going to delete that. Alright. And now we did hue, we did saturation. Actually, I'm going to frame this up, and I'm going to grab both of these. Click, drag, select, and I'm going to hit D to disable so I can see all the work that I did. So there's before, there's after. Before, after. And it's only been a few minutes. And we made a lot of progress. Cool. It's still not working though, is it? The quality of this image is one thing. Let's see. Hue, saturation, and now I'm going to do value. I can do that by getting another grade node. You can do things all within the same grade node, but then it's hard to see the steps that you took and to quickly control them. So this one, I'm going to change the name to H for hue. I may as well just hit hue. Okay. Actually, what else you could do is you could separate you could do 3 multiply nodes or 2 multiply nodes, one just for red and one just for blue, to have even more granular control. But let's see, over here for this grade, I'm going to hit value, rename it. Cool. So let's see what's happening here. I can tell this is way more intense in terms of the contrast, especially what I'm noticing is especially in the black point right now, which is jumping out to me. Just going to go over here to get more of a sense for it. It's a bit crunched because of how this photo may have been edited. So I'm going to get the black point right here and just move that up, just like in the histogram or the levels or the curves. I'm going to go like that. Boom. And now that I do this, I realize that the whites here maybe are a bit more blown out. This is just by eye. Maybe there could be more highlights of some kind on the cup. And you know what? I have a whole other half of the image to worry about, but you know what? For the purposes of demo, I'm just going to focus on this area the most. I would take the white point and crush it down. Boom. Maybe it needs to be a bit more intense. As if the light were coming through this window and hitting this. What would it look like? Probably like that. And it is a little bit blown out, but you know what? This is a little bit blown out too. That means this image needs to be as well. But now that I've increased the contrast, often what happens is, well, the eye is more sensitive to luminance than it is to saturation or chrominance. So when we do things that increase the contrast, Let's see. It gives the impression of being more saturated, so I might even go back to the saturation node. You could add another one, but I might even go back to that and do a 0.8. And I might go back to the hue and do even a little bit more blue. Seven. Alright, cool. So now I'm going to grab all of these and I'm going to hit before, after. Before, after. Yes, these could have taken place on the same day. The other thing I mentioned was quality of the image. This one looks a lot more soft. This image looks like it has more artifacting in it. I guess I could. We will tweak those sorts of things in more detail later and see how to do that. But I do just want to highlight a certain node here. It's not available, so I'm going to go over here to this other tab and hit all plugins update so I can get the access. Blocking. So if I zoom in here, I can basically see that this is more pixelated, this image, than this one. At least in certain ways. It could be sharpness, but it's more deteriorated. Oh, let me get rid of that. Yes, this image quality is like torn up. So I'm going to hit F, and now kind of gave it away. The blocky node is a pixelation filter. So I can actually pixelate on purpose. So one thing I could do, and we'll get into that kind of tweaking later, is sort of try to count how many pixels it is artifacted by. Oh, there's color separation and things happening. But anyway, I just want to buzz the image a little bit. So just a little hint for future reference, we do, when we integrate different elements, we do color and we do filters. This is just one kind of filter. All right. One last thing to highlight is I've done this in Nuke, but if I jump over to Premiere, which you should be familiar with, Premiere is something like you don't even put that on your resume anymore. Everyone just knows how to use this. Same with Photoshop. So here's my Premiere. I just cropped this image to the split screen really fast. Let's see. I'm gonna go over to effects, and I'm gonna do. Well, where is it? Actually, it's pretty intuitive. Once you know compositing, it's really easy to just read stuff and just figure out what can help you. For example, like if you're looking for HSV, it might not be in HSV terms. Oh, HLS, there's some stuff I can use in there that I can understand. Brightness, contrast, definitely. There is this core terminology of brightness, contrast, gamma, HSV throughout all software. Here we go. Here's something that, and it's really tempting in something like Premiere to start using color wheels and things, but really, it's a really basic the ideal case is just a really basic manipulation of RGB. Um, let's see, it's all you need to follow a few simple steps. So here it looks a little different, it's a little less convenient, but you can still get it done. And if you're not doing it in exactly the same way, you could at least do it in a more informed way. Here's our old friend. Oh, cool. Yeah, the presets. Actually, you can create a lot of these presets from scratch in Nuke, to be honest. Um, cool. So anyway, I just want to take a look at Lumetri really quick. I'm going to explore for a second to see if I can give you some more insights. We talked about we talked about white balance. We talked about color temperature. So I just want to give you an example of how you can bring a more informed perspective from compositing over into the daily life of video making, and how what some of the limitations are. This says temperature. If you turn the temperature up, well, it's not entirely clear exactly what this is doing. It's just an arbitrary uh, phenomenon that just seems to get warmer or cooler, but we don't know exactly how. Whereas if you're in Nuke, and you can manipulate the channels individually um, using RGB, you know exactly what's going on in every pixel of your image. But you don't always have access to platforms like Nuke, so it's nice to at least be informed to do things like this with a little bit more perspective about it. Exposure, this is also arbitrary. I'm not sure. It looks like it could be a gamma within a certain kind of a mask or something, or just it doesn't look like ordinary brightness, does it? Contrast, there's something that we know. Um, I would get into more of this later. This will be a hint for later, but highlights. But which highlights? Is it only the pure whites, or is it a certain range of pure whites? Same with shadows. Um, I suppose to some extent you could look these up in the manual and find out, but that's often limited. But that's a hint at um, the power of compositing and Nuke. Same here. If you're using a color wheel, you can't necessarily determine exactly what hue you're working with. If you move it to the left a little and to the right, and your eye cannot tell the difference, there's not much in the way of numerical values to let you know exactly what's happening inside in your image. And that could lead to mistakes, especially if a lot of small mistakes add up to something bigger, a bigger problem, or bigger overlooked issue, or something that just takes the professional sheen off of what you're doing. We will get deeper into things of that nature later on. But for now, we'll stick to Nuke here, doing this. All right, see you soon.